Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Maggie Smith.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
That is great. Can you tell me a little bit about your book?
Well, my book is called Truth and Other Lies. It's set in contemporary Chicago, or Chicago in 2018. And at its heart, it's the story of three women, a world-famous journalist, think really famous like Diane Sawyer, at the end of her career that's at risk of losing everything because of a online troll that is accusing her of unethical behavior. The second person is a neophyte politician. She's 49, knee-deep in a run for Congress, who's running on a pro-life platform, and also longing to reconnect with her estranged daughter who's come back to live with her after losing her job in New York. And that young daughter, who's a young reporter, desperately to kind of reboot this stalled career, and must choose between these two after she unearths a decade-old lie, because the famous journalist is her mentor and she's working for that journalist.
And as I was saying to you just before we started recording, I have been loving this book so much. Anyone listening to this, please go check it out. It's such an engaging story too. Like even just hearing that synopsis made me want to go and read more of it.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah, I've just been really enjoying this one. So I do have a question though, because as you were just sharing, it focuses on three different women at different stages in their lives and with very different platforms. How did you decide to focus specifically on one as the main narrator, you know?
Well, it wasn't always that way. The mother was initially in another version of this, the main character. And, but that was also a different story. It was an adoption story. So the mother was looking for her birth mother because she had found out she was adopted. So she had the teenage daughter, a college age daughter, was a little bit younger than Megan is in this. Megan is the major first person narrator of this. And so through other developmental editors that I talked to, they said, I think you'd better focus on just one person. I had 3 points of view, and that's an awful lot for a debut author to take on. And they said, I think you could concentrate on the 25-year-old and have her be offshooting the relationship with her mother and with her mentor. And I was also interested in that as a subject matter in the sense that I think that kind of rang true for me in my life. Not that I'm 25, but when I was 25, I think I was searching around for a mentor to pattern myself after because I didn't have a strong role model in my mother. So I think I felt like I could see how I could fashion a deeper story around three strong women like this, but concentrating on the 25-year-old.
I think that's really interesting because as I was reading it, at least, I felt like all of the characters were very fleshed out, and I can see how it would also function really well as split perspectives. And I think that just adds to a deeper narrative in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can reveal a lot about a character, even if they aren't a point of view character, by seeing them in dialogue with other people and seeing how they behave. Obviously. And also sometimes in my book, there are various characters that tell Megan, the main character, about the journalist. So they're describing some of the things that they know happened with the journalist without the journalist person telling that in a point of view character.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Megan reminded you a bit of you at 25 and you felt like you could relate to that kind of thing with the searching for the mentor. Were there any other ways that writing this book made you examine your own life or that related back to you?
Well, there's superficial things that, kind of like Easter eggs that I put in there, that I changed my name when I was 40. I didn't like my first name. And I finally got up enough courage to defy my mother, even at that age, and say, I'm going to court and changing my first name. I don't like it.
My mom is actually doing the same thing right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, my first name was Martha, and I was named after a grandmother. And I just kind of thought that sounded old fashioned, for somebody in fifth grade to be named Martha. I thought, but it did take me a long time to get up enough nerve to do it. Right. And then, of course, having Maggie Smith meant that I do get mistaken sometimes for, I often will say Maggie Smith, not that one.
Yes.
I introduce myself. And there's also a Maggie Smith poet that's very well known here in the States. So I really get more confused with her because she's a writer as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. So was that some of the inspiration behind Jocelyn for that? In that regard?
Well, that's what I was talking about, was the little Easter egg things that that is something that Jocelyn did when she was 18. And I just kind of put that in there because it was like, well, I did that. I know what that's like. And I went to Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern when I first started college. So I had that in common with Megan and kind of knew a little bit about journalism from that. And I have at various times lived in Chicago. Once when I was in college, a few years ago, I had an apartment in downtown Chicago for a couple of years. So there were things, the superficial things that were in common with me. But from a deeper theme, I think I'm very much interested in the different generations of women and how both feminism has affected them at various generations, the baby boomers, the Gen X, I guess you call them, and then the millennials. And thought that was an interesting interplay to be able to play those people against each other in their belief systems, but also just how they view the world. So I guess I was thinking that and I even have a passage in my book that is about this when Jocelyn's talking about the difference between her at 65 being fearful of things, fearful of losing things. You want to hold on to what you have. And Megan, who is all about wanting, something as simple as I want my own apartment versus, wider things like I want to be a success in life. I want to find a career that I can dedicate my life to. So I think 25-year-olds don't realize, or I didn't certainly when I was 25, realize that the decisions I was making at that time, which seemed like kind of decide where I'm going to live, where I'm going to go to college, who I'm going to fall in love with, maybe get married, can have such far-reaching repercussions in your life. And so it's really such a crucial time when you're making some very critical decisions that wind up sending you down a path, and that's the path you go down in your life. So I thought she probably was someone that was more malleable, had a lot more going on that was up in the air than the other two characters did.
Yeah, that was something that I have been really enjoying about the book as well, like the talk about like feminism and how it affects people differently. Would you mind speaking a bit on those themes in the book and how you decided to put those in the first place?
Well, I have a separate chapter that I think you've gotten to, and it's really kind of, people call it, it's your Me Too chapter. It's when Jocelyn, the older journalist, and Megan go to dinner or go to lunch with what turns out to be a pretty obvious, maybe a little bit of a caricature misogynist who is a male and is saying, I can help you get a job, Megan, and kind of leering at her a little bit. And I put that in there not so much really for the man, but for the interaction between Jocelyn and Megan later on when they're going away from this lunch, and you see how they're reacting differently to that behavior, because Megan is just saying, well, I'd never ask him for a favor. And Jocelyn is very much saying, hey, use what you got. This is, how do you think you'd be surprised how much I had to do to get where I am today, and kind of really is making a case for the ends justifying the means, which we see in a larger sense is part of what's going on with her throughout her life. And so I thought it was an interesting way to bring that out. And I think also, even though it is not about politics and it's not about abortion and it's not about some real hot topics, those topics are part of the book, and the characters are reacting differently to them. And certainly because Megan's mother is a pro-life advocate and is kind of known for that. And in fact, that's why she's been asked to run for office, because she hasn't held political office before this. Mm-hmm. And she's known because of that. And so she and Megan really disagree on that subject. Megan is very much of a pro-choice. And so they have discussions about that of Megan very adamantly saying, I don't think men who have never faced this choice should be making these decisions for us. And I think that's very much not only millennials, but I think millennials feel very strongly that way. And many other women at various, age groups feel that way as well. So I was trying to bring it out with not making that the focus of the story, but also having it very grounded in some real life issues that women are seemingly never endingly having to deal with.
Yeah.
Even when we thought we had dealt with them, but they seem to come back. So
certainly. Yeah. I love that you brought up that moment too, because it was really powerful. And I think the moment after they're at the restaurant. And I think that it really shows, at least what I interpreted as a big theme of the book is how, even though so many of these people were like on the same side politically, or even on opposing sides, there was still so many things that they didn't agree on. And like everyone had their own kind of agendas and own approaches to everything, which I thought it illustrated in a really interesting way.
Yeah, because in the beginning, Megan thinks she has everything in common with Jocelyn. Mm-hmm. They just agree on everything. And as she gets to know her better, she realizes there are quite a few things they don't agree on. Just as on the flip side, she realizes there's a lot of things her mother and her can discuss and agree on, even though there's other things, hot button issues that they disagree on.
Yes. Yeah, and it also shows some of the hero worship that Megan goes through in this book.
Yes.
And yeah, and some of the downfalls of that for sure.
And I think it was personal for me. There's a line toward the end of the book in which a character is asking Megan, why did you glom on to Jocelyn so much? And she says, because I felt like she treated me like I was special. Mm-hmm. And I've been wanting to feel that validation my whole life from my mother and never got it. And she's thinking that. She doesn't say that, but she says, I could barely admit that to myself. And I think that is part of what I felt like with my mother, is that even though I view as very well accomplished and got a PhD and, had a successful career, that it just never was good enough for her, or it was just like what she expected. I didn't get that a girl, wow, I'm so proud of you, that kind of thing. That validation wasn't there. And so I was channeling some of those feelings, I'm sure, through Megan as well.
I think that's really powerful and that comes across when authors do that in fiction writing, when it has elements of like personal things like that involved.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard from quite a few readers and bloggers that some of those lines that I've mentioned really resonated with them. So I don't think I'm alone in this, in this feeling.
Yeah. Even though I personally have not felt that, I know many, many people who have, and it still made it resonated so strong because it's a lot of the time something that's very universal.
Yeah.
Kind of pivoting a little bit, can you tell me a bit about your journey to publication and what that was like for you?
Well, at the time I started writing, I was really kind of doing it as a hobby because I was working full time. I owned a company basically that sold artwork throughout the country, and I was working full time at that. And I was getting a little bored with it. It had been going on for years and years, and so it was kind of running itself a little bit. And I wanted a creative outlet, so I had been in journalism, and I thought, well, I knew I couldn't sing and I knew I couldn't paint. So I turned to writing, I guess. And so I originally wasn't really planning to write a novel, but then it did feel like that was what I wanted to write. And I started taking craft classes and going to round tables and things like that. And eventually I did write this book in somewhat this form and was accepted by a publisher that then went bankrupt. So I was I did about 8 months worth of what's called developmental editing, which is digging deeper into the characters and more substantial kinds of things like who's going to be the point of view and what some that are plot and some that are character driven. Mm-hmm. And I had finished that. And we were at the stage of doing a cover design when I got word from a couple of the people at the publisher I was working with. And this was a small publisher. They had about 8 people, and it was a woman-owned business. And the editor and the book designer and the marketing person all told me, we're all resigning this week. And we think the company will probably go under. And they did. So I was kind of, so I got my rights back, which was good. I got the contract null and void, but then I was without a home again. And I had been thinking that I was going to be publishing in March 2021. So this time last year. Mm-hmm. But I had also liked the feeling of being with a small press. And I had tried to get an agent, and that hadn't quite worked out. So I really had never gone agent publisher. I had just gone agent, not getting anywhere, and gone to small presses. And so I went looking for a small press, thinking that they could probably maybe turn it around quicker, because I was ready to go. I didn't want to wait another 2 years for this. So I did find one, and I got some suggestions from people that I live in Milwaukee. And I had written the book about Chicago. So I was looking in the Midwest, and they said, there's a publisher right down the street from you. She's about 30 minutes away, and they have traditionally done children's books, but they've opened up an adult imprint, and they've done that for a couple of years. And they've published a few things. Maybe you ought to go to them. And that's where I wound up publishing. So it's been I can get in the car and drive ARCs to them when they run out, and vice versa, and have pictures taken with them when the boxes of books come in. And so it's been a great experience. I hired a fairly well-known publicist firm in Chicago because I knew I needed help on the bigger picture of marketing. But for the publishing end of it, I've been very pleased with the person that I'm with. It's been a good partnership, I think.
That is so cool. I'm so glad that you were able to get this published. That's a interesting journey to get there,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it sounds like you're with somebody cool now. And small press is just excellent. I always vouch for them because it's great.
Well, this one is a woman-owned press too. It's there. I think there is one man that works there, but for the most part, it's women that are running it. And one of the things I get a lot of compliments on is my cover. And I will say that compared to other people I know that have published with some of the bigger firms, I got to say a lot about my cover and be a real collaborator with the designer on it. And since I came out of an art background, that was very important to me. I kind of believed in the importance of a cover in the initial stages, particularly with an author that didn't have a following, that this is my debut. So I'm real glad that I landed where I was and was able to collaborate with the cover designer so directly.
That is awesome. Yeah, I follow you on Instagram, and I saw you were posting the road to how the cover was designed. I thought it was so interesting because that's not something that you see a lot, and especially not from the author saying, "Oh, well, I was working with them on this, and I suggested this." I just think it's cool to see stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as you said, that this book is set in Chicago. And as somebody that lives in Chicago, it was very fun to read and kind of point things out to myself like, hey, I was writing that L stop. Oh, I was there. I did that. So where did that idea come from to set it here?
Well, I've always loved Chicago, and I was born and raised in Oklahoma. So when I went to college, I really wanted to get away from Oklahoma, and I wanted to, see the wider world. And so I wanted to be in journalism. I was applying to journalism school, and so Northwestern has one of the top journalism schools. And so I thought, Chicago, it's still kind of the Midwest. It's a big city. It's a great school. So that's where I went. And then I wound up years later living in Milwaukee, which is only 90 minutes from Chicago, and living for a couple of years. I had a shared apartment, a rental apartment that I shared with somebody. They lived there during the week, and I lived there on the weekends. And so that was when I really got to know Chicago as an adult. In college, I didn't have any money to be going around anywhere. But I always thought, why aren't more books set in Chicago? There's so many books set in San Francisco and Seattle and New York, of course, and even New Orleans. And yet so many writers are from Chicago. There's a fair number of detective stories. There's set in Chicago, but otherwise just regular old books, not as much. And so, but there's lots of writers and lots of people that have connections to Chicago, even if they don't live there anymore. And so I thought, well, I know Chicago. It's real close if I want to drive down and, scout some apartments or, neighborhoods to set things in. I kind of know the lay of the land a little bit. 3 million people live in Chicago. So I thought, well, that's a whole lot of people I can sell this book to. So that's kind of where it came from.
That is so cool. Yeah, I've had a lot of people on this show, and whenever I have people that write books in Chicago, it's always fun because it's kind of rare, but every time they get super passionate about it and are like, and nothing's ever set here. And I'm like, I know. So it's been fun though, seeing kind of a trend recently where they're starting to be a little bit more well,
there was a book, The Great Believers, of course, a few years ago. And then The Most Fun We Ever Had, Claire Lombardo had a well-known novel that I think was about 2 years ago, maybe. It was and it was set in Chicago. And so maybe we're turning the corner, and Chicago's going to be the next hot place that people start talking about.
Ooh, exciting. So I only have a couple more questions. And the first of which is, how did you, when you were younger, did you write? Because I know when you were telling me about how you started getting published and everything, but how was that for you when you were a kid? Were you a big reader? Or
I've always been a really big reader, but not a big writer. I'm not one of those writers that says, from 10 years old, I had this little journal and I was writing and plays and short stories. No. I never did any of that. I never made up all these stories or anything like that. I did a lot of reading. Yes, I've always been a big reader and still a big reader. But no, I think my background in writing was much more academic, first of all, because I did get a PhD in psychology. So I wrote, papers for academia. And then when I was in journalism, it was much more who, what, when, where, how, not the creative part of it. So maybe it's just later in life I wanted to be more creative and let myself go a little bit. But I wasn't an early writer like a lot of people are.
That's
so there's always a chance. You can, any age you can start writing.
Yes. I love when people make a point of saying that, because it's so true. Any stage of life, any age, you can just start writing, and that makes you.
I have a funny story about the first short story I wrote. Oh, yeah? I took a class, and I thought it was how to write a short story, and I thought, well, let's figure out how to write a short story. That doesn't take as much time as writing a novel. And then come to find out, I got a note from the professor. It was at the Iowa Summer Writing Festival, and he said, "Yeah, you need to send your story in by Sunday evening." And I thought, what do you mean? I I thought we were going to learn how to write a story at this. He said, oh, no, you present a story and we're going to workshop it during the week. And I was like, this is Saturday, and I've never written a short story in my life, and I've got till Sunday to write one.
That's one day to learn, right? One way to learn.
Yeah. Right? So I said to my husband, I am going into the bedroom, and when I come out, I'm going to have a short story. And I wrote it in one day. I edited it and revised it the next day. I sent it in Sunday. It got workshopped, and the interesting part is it got accepted into an anthology. It's published.
That is so cool.
I have never written a short story since. I'm just, that's my, I did it once. I'm done.
Okay. That is amazing. I love stories like that. It shows that you really have like a gift for that. The fact that
maybe, or I just had a great idea or something,
Yeah. Oh, that is awesome. I think stuff like that is so interesting. Like, because sometimes when you know so much, at least I've had this experience in my writing.
You know too much.
Yeah. When you're like, all right, I know that this is what makes up story structure, and this is how you create a setting, and this is how the characters work, that you get bogged down in that and you don't just write. Yeah.
Yeah. I am a pretty quick writer. I think my old journalism training is I write to deadline. So it's a little hard without a deadline. I'm not signed with an agent who's saying I need to have your pages by, March. So I have to do my own self-discipline in that. And I tend to put off things till the last minute. So, like the short story, not on purpose that time.
Yes. So how did it feel when you finished this book? Because this is your first book, as you've said.
It is. Yeah.
What was
maybe
that
my only
like?
book? No, I hope not. But I think what I felt like was, is it done? Because I had written 2 other things with these same 3 characters, not the characters they are, but the mother, daughter, mentor kind of triumvirate. And so I talked about the adoption story. And then there was one before that, which was kind of the mother getting divorced. And each of those, for one reason or another didn't work. But when I wrote this one, I think my primary thing was, well, is this the one? Is it done? Or do I have to do it again? Because I had now done it twice already. So that was the primary feeling is this going to be the one? Is this strong enough that I can actually go out in the marketplace and get somebody to publish this? So that's the feeling I remember. And then when it did get published, I that first publisher, the one that went bankrupt, I can remember opening up the email, and I had gotten quite a few agent and small presses saying, not for us, no, not. And I opened this one up and said, we'd like to publish your novel. And I was like, is that saying what I think it's saying? Wait a minute, I'm going to read that again. We would like to publish your novel. Oh my goodness, they're going to publish my novel. So there is that feeling of you kind of open up every email thinking it's going to be a no because you're just so used to that. And then when they say yes, it's a little hard to kind of wrap your head around. But a good feeling.
Yeah, it's joyous, but also like I can imagine that it would be kind of like a shock after.
Oh my gosh.
Everyone comes on here and is always like, oh my gosh, all the rejection as a writer. Like I always hear people say that. And I'm just always curious about like what that moment is like when you get to see the first yes.
Yes. And sometimes you get a couple of yeses and then you have to figure out, oh, well, now I get to choose. You're not choosing me. I've got 2 or 3 options I can choose from. So that did happen to me when I went back the second time. I had 3 small presses that offered publication. So I got to kind of evaluate which one I wanted to go with. So that was a nice feeling.
That's really cool. Yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for coming on today. I just have one final question for you.
Okay.
And that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, I've started work on another novel quite a while ago. It was probably a year ago I started it in NaNoWriMo in 2020. Yeah. And it's halfway through and kind of planned out where it's going because it's a psychological suspense. And so it has a murder in it and it has suspects and things like that require a little bit more planning. And recently I've started thinking I might write a sequel to Truth and Other Lies, having to do not with the primary character, but with the mother and the person that appears late in the novel that is the troll.
Mm-hmm. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, so taking two characters that are somewhat secondary characters. The mother's really kind of a primary character too, but not having it necessarily be about Megan and Jocelyn, but taking two other characters that you've come to know that also have arcs during the book, but they're not the primary focus, and having them have an adventure. Her mother has moved to Washington, D.C. to work for the Republican Party, and I think I could weave something that is somewhat of a mystery out of that. So we'll see.
Oh, that would be so cool. Well, if you want to come back on the show, I would be happy to talk with you about a potential sequel or the psychological
or the
thriller,
other one. Yes,
those are always fantastic. So yeah. Well, thank you again. I had a great time chatting with you. Everyone, go out and buy this book because it is so good.
Thank you very much, Molly. I appreciate that.
Yeah. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Maggie Smith.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after, the end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.